Hello. Today's podcast features Opgal. We have Hashmonay, Chief Innovation Scientist, and Ilan Waldman, Industrial Sales Director. Hello, Ram and Ilan. Would you mind starting off just by describing your role with the organization for Opgal?
Sure. So thank you for having us. I'm Ilan. I'm the Industrial Sales Director for Opgal, responsible for the North American market, currently located in Canada.
And thank you, Steve. I'm Ram, and I am responsible for all the research and development in our industrial division here in Opgal and developing new products.
Excellent. Would you mind telling us just a little bit about the history of Opgal?
Sure. So Opgal, excuse me. So Opgal has been around for about 40 years now. It's one of the largest thermal imaging manufacturers in the world. We are manufacturing thermal imaging solutions for the defense industry, security, industrial, as well as aviation. Our headquarters is based and the manufacturing is out of northern Israel. And we have offices, we work with partners worldwide. With offices and representation in the US, Canada, and India as well. Opgal is actually owned by Rafael Systems and Elbit Systems, which are a couple of the world leading defense companies. And that's Opgal in short.
Excellent. So, Ram, you have background in OpenPath FTIR. Could you talk a little bit about the synergies between FTIR with fence line monitoring and the Opgal camera?
Yes, we all know about the rules in the Bay Area and the South Coast, in AQMDs in California, and about the fence line monitoring. And we know about Method 325. Any fence line monitoring is being complemented by OGI for root cause analysis. And once you find a leak or outliers on the fence line, we know that OGI is the technology to pinpoint and find the leaks and fix it. It's part of what I used to call in early days wise LDAR instead of smart LDAR. You measure on the fence line and you go with OGI and find the leaks. And the other side of this synergy is that you use OGI for inside the fence line on units with 24/7 with fixed installations, or with portable OGI, do your smart LDAR surveys, find leaks, fix them, and in this way you impact the results for the industry on their fence line monitoring. So there we have both ways synergy, you know, OGI helping finding leaks that are found on the fence line, and OGI also impacting reducing the levels on the fence line. And we can see how once you find a leak, how that was not found on the fence line originally, how it impact the values on the fence line. So there is a great synergy between the technologies.
Fantastic. What about the rest of the world? I know that happens. So in the U.S., in California, there's FTIR on the fence line, and in the U.S., the OGI cameras have received wide adoption. The rest of the world, could you give us just a little insight on the adoption rate of OGI, say versus method 21 in the rest of the world, and the use of optical gas imaging cameras for safety purposes around the rest of the world?
I think that we see a clear connection between regulations, governmental regulations, and the use of OGI, because OGI cameras tend to be a little not as cost effective as the regular LDAR. So we definitely see that there is a connection. So where the regulation is more strict, OGI is becoming a lot more common. For example, if we take Canada, OGI in Canada has definitely increased. The use, of OGI cameras have definitely increased in the last couple of years. We see this happening right now in Asia, in Asian countries, a little less in Europe, but again, it's all connected to the regulations. So as soon as the government requires and provides stricter regulations, OGI becomes a lot more common and a popular use of detection.
I would like to add, I think OGI is more cost effective. Maybe the price is not, but as efficiency, it's much more efficient than the sniffers, so the method 21. So eventually it's more cost effective, but you have to convince the industry to do it. Usually we are talking about the rest of the world with regulations, and sometimes we can see that regulation in the US are followed by regulations around the world. We see this pattern that everybody is looking up to US EPA and even local, state regulations, and eventually they are followed. And sometimes, since the regulatory process in the US is slow, so we have a proposal in the US, but it's being finalized faster in other places, but it's been copied. I follow regulation around the world for a long time now, and I see this pattern that it starts in the US, but finalized faster in other states, in other countries.
Well, that is one of the topics that we will be discussing at 4C, which is the innovation that is happening in so many sensing and monitoring technologies. The innovation drives the technology, that the technology increases so much faster than the regulatory change that regulatory change and regulations have now become the primary impediment to emission reductions in the US. I believe the EPA and many of the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, the environmental groups, many of those environmental groups are aware of that. And some of the technologies, interestingly now, do not want to become part of the regulatory framework for that very reason, that if they can get funding through corporate governance, so companies implement those technologies on a voluntary basis, they can then put that in their annual reports and they get credit for doing the right thing. That has more value to them, both the company that is reducing the emissions and the company that is selling the technology. It has more value to both of them to do it voluntarily and get good press in the annual reports versus getting bogged down in the regulatory cycle, because once you start to get into the regulatory cycle, it will actually kill a technology. It'll take 5 years to get incorporated into the regulatory structure. And during that 5 years, this orphan technology can't survive 5 years before it becomes adopted. So there was one particular technology that reduced methane and they were not going to pursue the regulatory channels. In fact, they did not want to become part of the regulatory channels in fear that industry will do nothing with that technology until the EPA passes regulations, because otherwise what they do may not meet the requirements. So they're going to not spend money twice. They're going to wait till the requirements are final and then implement the technology. But by then, if it's a small company and it's an orphan technology, the company's already gone and died. So yes, this whole concept of regulatory, how fast regulations adopt new technologies is a major concern point. And that's something that we'll talk about extensively at the conference.
I could give an OGI, you know, the alternative work practice that was published in 2008, and I was at EPA at the time, did not meet the expectations of the technology developers, because it did not actually replace the Method 21 totally. And only now, what is it, 13 years later, we are thinking about there is work at EPA to modify the alternative work practice and to line up with the technology development and allow industry to use OGI LDAR programs totally. So it's very important that organization like yours and NGOs and everyone will push forward this regulation that is working. I have some echo. I don't know how it sounds on your side. So
there's no echo on our side.
Okay, so it's just interrupting my line of thoughts. But this is an example how slow regulatory and initiating voluntary programs and promote these is very important for these technologies to survive. It's very important.
Yes, and you're right, Ram. I was being very generous when I said it takes a regulatory body 5 years to incorporate a technology into the regulatory structure for optical gas imaging. The first instances that we saw were back in 2000. By 2011, it was a 10-year-old technology, and there was wider adoption by industry on a voluntary basis. And here we are in 2020, 20 years after the invention of the technology and 10 years after it becoming widely available, and it's still not accommodated within the regulatory structure for refineries. I am hopeful that by this fall,
you're talking about OGI?
Yes, OGI.
Yeah, so the initial regulatory process was very fast. You know, in 2004 it made a splash. 2008 we had the regulation, but it was not adopted fully. It was half-baked regulation that did not help the technology. So it's very important not just move fast, but move right, and do something that will support the technology and not will be impediment to fully adopted by industry.
I think that we've seen this year that with all of the whole situation worldwide with the COVID issue, that if the government wants, they can push things and approve things much quicker than usual. We see it with the vaccines as an example. So there's obviously a lot more behind the scenes regarding these decisions, but I think regarding OGI, even though the regulations are not 100% there, companies are realizing the benefits of using OGI cameras compared to the alternative method. And I think that's what pushed these types of products forward worldwide.
The optical gas imaging implementation or adoption within the U.S. is nearly universal at this point. I'm not aware of any chemical plants or refineries that don't have optical gas imaging cameras. It's just a matter of if they became, if the AWP, which the AWP will most likely change by this fall to be OGI only, then it will really become part of the refinery operations rather than a sort of complementary measure or a feel-good measure. It will become the focal point for emission reductions. And of course, when you have fence line monitoring, the more real-time monitoring and sensing you have, the greater the benefit from the Opgal camera. And that may be something to talk about specifically, which is Method 21 requires monitoring every either 90 days or every year. Whereas if you have real-time sensing and then you use an optical gas imaging camera to go find that leak, then you may find that leak within 45 minutes, not 45 days. And the large leaks constitute the bulk of the emissions. And as we find those leaks in a much shorter time frame, we have a great reduction of emissions. And that's exciting to see the development of those real-time sensors, and exciting to see the next step of emission reductions. Part of the problem with Method 21 was Method 21 was implemented in the 80s and 90s. By the year 2000 in the US, it was broadly implemented. Certainly by 2010 to 15, the vast bulk of industrial sources in the refining, petrochemical, and oil and gas industry had some type of monitoring. So whatever emission reduction could be achieved by Method 21 has been achieved. To get the next 6 sigma reduction, that, if we went from 100% in 1980 down to a 90% reduction by 2010, between 2010 and 2020, we've pretty much stayed the same, despite the abundance of this technology. The hope is that between 2020 and 2025, we start adopting these new innovative technologies and we get yet another 90% reduction. It would be nice by 2025 if fugitive emissions were 1% of what they were in 1980 versus remaining at 90%.
Yeah, and the key thing here is the real time you mentioned. If you find a leak very fast and fix it, it's a huge emission reduction in the whole scheme of things. And that's exactly, you're talking mostly about refineries, but there is also the upstream, and so Opgal is now working on we have a matrix of 2 by 2. We have portable cameras, we have fixed cameras, fixed installation cameras, and we have cooled and uncooled. So we have 4 types of technology to complete the picture to get the last 10% of emission reduction that you mentioned.
That fits in perfectly with the segue and transition to the next set of topics, which is, could you explain just a little about the difference between cryogenic cooling or a cryogenic cooled camera and I think what you're referring to is a mid-wave or an uncooled camera?
Okay, so on that axis of the matrix that I mentioned, we have the cooled and uncooled. The cooled is typically in the mid-wave IR, which is around 3.2 to 3.5 or 3.6 micron. And the uncooled is between 7 and 7 and 14 micron region. So the difference, I will not go into the technology differences into details, but the general difference, in general, the cooled can see very sensitively, it can see hydrocarbons, total hydrocarbons. It cannot differentiate. It can see methane, benzene, all the alkanes, and long list, everything that has a carbon, hydrogen, uh, how do you say? I forgot the word in English.
Carbon hydrogen bond.
Yeah, bond. I forgot the word bond. I had it in Hebrew. Uh, anyhow, so every molecule that has the carbon hydrogen bond can be seen in the cooled camera in the mid-wave IR. By this camera, and very sensitive. It's very sensitive, and because it's a semiconductor detector and it needs to be cooled in order to be very sensitive. It's been cooled to cryogenic temperatures, which are below 120 Kelvin, which is, I will not translate it to Fahrenheit now, but it's 120 is about minus 150. What is it? About minus 150 centigrade. And if I have time, I will translate to Fahrenheit. But anyhow, it's very cold. It's very cold, and you need, if you ever held OGI camera, cool camera, you have this noise of the Stirling engine that cools there is a compressor, and there is a compressing and expansion that cools the detector to this temperature in order to be sensitive to reduce the noise. Now, in the long wave IR, it's you use a bolometer. It's not it's a bolometer. It's a resistance measurement. You have a material that absorbs the thermal energy, and this material changes its resistance, and it's been detected and transformed to radiance values or temperature values. And this is the principle of how it works, but it works in room temperature. You don't need to cool it. And it's cheaper, but also less sensitive, and the list of compounds is different. The seed stretch bonds that we mentioned in the midwave IR is spread all over the long wave IR. So the compounds are spread out, but we don't have many of those alkanes. We don't have strong absorption of these compounds, but we have quite strong absorption for methane. So that, therefore, as far as VOCs, the only VOC that we see very well is the methane in the long wave, in the uncooled camera, but it's still less sensitive. And it's methane because no other hydrocarbon is will be detected by this camera. So it's unique for methane. There are some other compounds that can be measured in this region, like refrigerants, but usually they are not in the same place when you detect them. If you look at air conditioner, you expect to see refrigerants, and when you look at well pad components, you expect to see natural gas.
We lost the sound again. Sorry, Ron.
Okay.
There, it's back.
Should I talk or?
Yeah. It's back
okay.
again. And
okay. I don't know where you lost me. So.
Just
Can I just cut in for a minute, or Ram,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
want
no.
No,
Maybe I
yeah.
wanted to finish the thought, but yeah, you cut in, Ilan. Doesn't matter.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I have a perfect setup for you in terms of the question. So
no, because what I wanted to do is kind of summarize everything that Ram said in a very technical way. I wanted to summarize it in a very 1-2 sentences, so people who are not so technically understanding of OGI cameras will understand what the difference are. What's the difference between the two types of cameras?
okay, I'll ask that question. Okay, Ilan, could you summarize the differences between the cooled and uncooled camera?
Sure. So basically, if you take everything that Ram said, to summarize it in a simplified way, because a lot of times people question, well, why would I purchase a cooled camera for an X amount of money when I can get a much more cost-effective camera like the uncooled? So it's very simple. The cooled camera is much more sensitive. You're able to see over 400 VOCs and methane with this camera. You can see it from far away, and you can see even small, tiny little leaks. If you're taking the uncooled camera, it's not as sensitive. You're limited to methane only, and only to larger leaks. You won't be able to see small leaks unless you get really, really, really close to the premises. And like Ram said, there are some other refrigerants as well that you're able to detect with this camera, but those are generally the main two differences of the cameras.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So the cooled camera is looking at the mid wave, the uncooled camera is looking at the long wave. So the uncooled camera uses a microvolometer, which is very good at seeing methane and refrigerants and a few other compounds, but the mid-wave camera, or the cooled camera, is required in order to see the carbon-hydrogen bond and other molecules like alkanes and up to 400 other volatile organic compounds with a carbon-hydrogen bond. Is that a fair?
That's a good summary. That's a good summary.
So the microvolometer, would you mind just, people throw the word microvolometer around, just real quick to understand it, just a tad bit more about that long wave camera. So what is a microvolometer? How does it work? And in the long wave camera that Opgal sells, what range does that microvolometer see?
Okay, I also mentioned, let me take it back, already mentioned that it's actually measuring resistance. So every pixel in the array of pixels has like a bridge of material that can absorb infrared thermal radiation. So once it's absorbed energy, it changes resistance as a function of the number of photons that is being absorbed. And this change in resistance is being detected in each pixel. At each pixel, it's arrays of pixels that can be 640 by 480. It's I don't know how many pixels it is, but we can do the math. So it is measuring. You have like a electrical impulse that is proportional to the temperature actually, and you can calibrate this camera to measure the temperature in each pixel or the radiance, and then how it works for gas detection. That's what's important. You can, from in the range of 7 micron to 14 micron, you can put a narrower filter either on the detector that cover a small range, spectral range in this region, and it being devoted to a group of gases. So the methane is on the lower part, between 7 to 8.5. Refrigerant are below 10 generally, and we have ammonia that is all over between 9 and 11, and SF6 and ethylene. There are a lot of compounds that you can see. Opgal has 3 cameras that are designed, are optimized in that region of the microvolometer in the long wave IR. We have a methane camera that can see some other gases in lower efficacy, but we have a refrigerant that is optimized to essentially to all refrigerants, and we have the ammonia and SF6, sulfur hexafluoride, and ethylene and other gases. That these are the current 3 OGI long wave IR, and we call it the icy gas mini because we believe it's the smallest OGI camera in the world.
So I think it can feed into the next topic, which is, hey, what are the primary uses for the Opgal camera? And wait, I'll ask the question again. I'll back it up because that's going to be too broad a question. So what are the primary uses for the cooled mid-wave camera?
Ilan, before you start, I would say that we mentioned it before and you summarized refineries that has emissions that more than 90% of its emissions is VOCs. Is refineries is the main use of the cooled camera of the mid-wave IR. Ilan,
Hey,
you can.
Hey, Ilan.
No, I agree, and I think that we kind of touched, you know, we kind of touched on this before. The main, the icy gas mini is mostly for methane detection, not mostly, all for methane detection, where the icy gas 2.0 is methane and VOC, so it's targeting more refineries.
Okay, are there other uses for the Opgal camera?
Let me, I think it's a good transition to the whole world of fixed cameras and 24/7. You know, the IC-Gas 2 is the IC-Gas 2 and the IC-Gas Mini are 2 portable cameras that you can use. One is the long wave and methane primarily, and one is total VOCs, very sensitive, more expensive, but for VOCs, but both are portable cameras. I think the other uses, we can use OGI technology for to look at the old tank storage tank terminal and in real time 24/7 see outlier events of emissions and then go and take care of them. Or so I don't know if that's where you're leading to, Steve, but I think the other uses, as you asked, is use OGI technology not just in the portable mode, but also in the fixed camera mode. And we are developing our line of products that we call 24/7, IC-Gas 24/7, that are along this line of thoughts, uses.
I think that OGI, yeah, so everything that Ram said, I mean, we can keep that. You can just maybe edit the who's answering, but I think that sums it up. And in addition, I would say that OGI technology from Opgal today, it's not just a camera, it's a full complete solution. That's, you know, that's the direction that that we have developed in the last year, 2 years, where you're not just using a camera, but you're able to connect to our IC Sight software as well, and quantify your leaks. And we're also offering fixed 24/7 solutions as well, where you can place the camera unmanned with our IC Sight Pro software, with automation, alerts, quantification, and so on.
Okay, Ilan and Ram, the environmental justice movement is looking at impacts on the neighborhood, and the handheld cameras have done a great job of, when operations finds out about a leak or knows there's a leak, you can use a handheld camera to go identify the exact source of that leak. However, because of the environmental justice movement, there's a drive for persistent or 24/7 monitoring, and that may require a fixed solution with a fixed camera that has eyes on the facility 24/7. Does Opgal offer solutions that address this concept of persistent or 24/7 monitoring?
Absolutely. And I think you're bringing up a good point by calling it solutions rather than a camera sale or any type of product. I think more than ever, the industry is looking for a complete set of solutions. And in Opgal, what we've done in the last year and a half is, we believe that one product is not necessarily ideal for everything, and we believe in combining products together. So we do have what we call our IC-Gas 24/7 fixed monitoring solutions. Just like the handheld, we're able to provide a cooled or an uncooled version of the camera, depending on what the requirements are. But I think the key point that we offer is our IC Sight software as well, which is an automated alert and quantification software that comes with our cameras. So it really enables you to install one camera or two cameras, depending on the site, and have it unmanned, running for 24/7, and using our software.
So sorry. Keep going.
No problem. So using our software, you're able to have automatic alerts by email or SMS or any other way. So I'll start that again. I got lost.
Up to the phone call, you were fine. So just.
So where was the phone call? What was I saying until the phone?
And use our software for, and that's.
So okay. So you can detect using our 24/7 IC-Gas fixed solutions, and then using our software, you're able to receive alerts and quantify as well, send reports. It's a really neat software, very user friendly, which we are constantly, by the way, improving, and it's being improved, I would say, even on a monthly basis. So
No, Ilan, it's on a daily basis. It's
daily
being
basis.
improving.
Hold on. Let me put my.
That's my job.
Oh, hold on. I got someone SMSing me every second. I turn off my phone now. I can concentrate.
Yeah, I turned mine on silent too. Yeah, so I think we've got a lot of good content.
Let me.
Yeah, I think I covered it also in my initial.
You covered it perfectly. I just want to have one comment on this. People need to understand that when you have a fixed solution and you have the computer looking these frames, it's not, you're taking the man out of the loop. It's not so easy to detect a leak or emission event without implying, artificial intelligence, and you want to avoid as many as possible false alarms, false positives, and you don't want to miss. You don't want to have false negatives. You don't want to have big events that you're not capturing, and it's a very challenging task. And here in Opgal, we are working diligently to improve this, and we're truly doing huge strides towards having independent, standalone, automated detection and quantification system solution, as Ilan said.
Yeah, is the challenge of quantification with a fixed system that quantification is distance dependent.
It's good you say that, because you're going to ask me about the 4C presentation. That's the title of my 4C presentation. The challenges of quantification. I'll let you ask the question about the 4C and then I will answer. But this is exactly the topic. It's very challenging. To do automated detection is one thing, but doing quantification over a long range with changing atmospheric conditions is very, very difficult task. And I'm using my 35 years of experience in this, and to address these challenges.
Yes, yeah. The holy grail is a optical gas imaging camera that can quantify emissions. And actually, I can get into that. It's a really interesting topic. Okay, so I'm going to approach it from a couple of different ways. One is talking about innovation. The camera is an amazing camera that with your naked eye you could never see hydrocarbon leaks. Now you can see these leaks. Not only leaks, you can see different compounds. That methane absorbs in the 7 to 8.5 range, and so you can design a camera to see methane. You can ethylene. That's all amazing, and the ability to quantify those leaks, not just see them, but quantify them. That is innovation which will continue most likely for the next 20 years. So yeah. I'll ask a question about that, because people want to know about that. And then I can also ask about the continued innovation with regard to fixed systems using AI to identify leaks with a fixed system and to alert. That's all really cool, interesting topics, and it keeps people coming back. So if you do another webinar or another podcast, and you do a podcast every 6 months, then you can start giving updates on these technologies. And then you have a series of podcasts over a 2 or 3 year period that would be very interesting for people to listen to, and how this technology becomes a bigger and bigger driver. Because you're right, eventually it's going to be a bunch of fixed cameras constantly looking for leaks, with artificial intelligence identifying those leaks and sending the video clip to the control room. And the control room goes out and finds it
and quantify it.
Yes, finds it and quantifies it, and the control room goes and sends a maintenance person out to repair it, and then the pan, tilt, zoom Opgal IC gas camera refocuses on the leak and quantifies the emission reduction and creates a report to be put in the annual report that shows how much emissions were reduced by this amazing technology. Yeah, that's where it's all going. That's not good for the LDAR companies in the United States, because when that technology hits the market, the need for a person running around a refinery with method 21 will become completely obsolete. Okay, so let me back up and ask the question and kind of get that content. And part of that format and content is that if this becomes a series of podcasts over time, there's always, you know, what were the advancements, where have we come, where are we still going, and, you know, because you're never going to be there, right? You're always going to have continuing innovation. That's part of what this whole series is about, is this never-ending drive for innovation to reduce emissions further and further. Okay, so I'm going to ask a question. These technologies are amazing, that you can see methane with these long-wave cameras, that there are now fixed solutions that can give you 24/7 persistent monitoring. What are the innovations? What's happening in the innovation lab of RAM today, and where, if we touch base again in 6 months, what are some of the innovations that we'll be able to talk about in 6 months as being completed rather than ongoing?
Okay, so we're doing a lot on gas detection, automated detection, and we are doing a lot of work also on gas quantification. So the easy part is doing it in the short range. Short range is you ignore the atmosphere. It doesn't matter if it's a humid day or very dusty day. You just need to differentiate between gases and steam and gases and dust coming off the in your frame. So it's we are working on it. We already have accomplished a lot of advancement, and we, as you said, it never ends. It always get better. So, but we are already there in the short range, both on quantification and gas detection. We are already there. We have demonstrated short range and detection and quantification, and we will improve it over time. I want to make a general comment that gas quantification with OGI will always be a limited and really condition-dependent task. So sometimes you can get higher accuracy. We have good temperature difference between the background and the air where the gas is going out to. You will have better accuracy of this quantification, but in some conditions, even in the short range, you will not get. When you're very close to the detection limit, it's very hard to accurately quantify the gas leak. The quantification that we focus is in two terms. It's in mass flow or flow, leak rate. It can be volumetric or mass, but that's one way. And we also quantify in concentration. So we are trying to do both ways, and it depends on the client or the user what kind of quantification that he wants. So if you're talking about innovation, where we're taking it, the great challenge is moving into the fixed world. We're doing very well on quantification with the portable. We find a leak, we put the camera on a tripod. In the next 2 minutes, we will quantify the leak and move to the other leak. That's relatively easy compared to the automated detection. So we are moving to the fixed camera that we have automated detection. It's easier to do it in a short range than in the long range. Okay, so when we're doing long range detection, we did some hardware modification. We have some hardware modification for the long range camera, and that's the next thing that we are going to do, and this is exactly what we are planning in 6 months to present in the 4C, is the challenges of quantifying over the camera in the long range can look over a storage tank farm or terminal, find a leak. That's the first challenge, to find accurately or detect the leak accurately and differentiate it between a plume of steam or birds that are moving inside the frame, or anything that may look like a gas but it's not a gas. That's the first challenge in the long range, because in the long range we have a huge attenuation of electromagnetic radiation, and we could have a lot of impact on daytime. We have the sun angle, we have a lot of impact, and we have humidity, and we have haze, we have particulate. All of these issues are coming into our research and development program, and we are striving to reach a point that we can say that we can, in some conditions, accurately detect and quantify emissions up to a kilometer, which is 2/3 of a mile. We are pushing it, and it really depends. It's a really trade-off. Huge leak we can take over 10 miles, but small leaks, relatively small emissions that are of interest of your environmental justice. You want to see, if you look from one side of the tank farm, you want to cover the whole tank farm. You don't want that on the other side to be a big leak that you will ignore because you don't have the capability. So you need to somehow find ways to address these issues, and this is the next big challenge for our innovation. So we, including this, not just the hardware development and increasing sensitivity and optics and all of these. There's a lot of atmospheric sciences and remote sensing experience that goes into this kind of platform solutions that we are developing. We are not just selling the camera, we selling the whole solution with the IC Pro platform that can take data from all of these cameras, and some of these calculations can take information from two cameras, do some fusion between these cameras and give one picture of delineate all of this information to the client, telling them where it comes from, how much, and where it's going to. This is for the fence line communities.
Ultimately, we want a solution that reduces emissions and it identifies and reduces those emissions as soon as
possible. And all of this in real time. That's the challenge. So that's where we're going to. We're trying to create a solution that will give the client, it may include 3 or 4 cameras that will give them this answer to cover the whole site. And whenever you have a big leak, you want to take care of it before it goes outside the fence line. So it's that's the challenge, and that's the innovation, and it will get better on a daily basis from now until eternity.
I absolutely love it. I love it. The drive to reduce emissions is never ending. People never say the air is clean enough today. We don't need to find better solutions tomorrow. The air is clean enough today. That statement will never be uttered. The world doesn't go there. Whatever innovation you have, that innovation gets adopted, emissions are reduced, and the next level of innovation comes along and we further reduce emissions. And you know, along those lines, you know, fugitive emissions, a lot of people maybe aren't aware that fugitive emissions have been reduced by at least 90% up to this point. The real drive is to get these technologies, the optical gas imaging technologies, all of the sensing technologies that are real-time and persistent. That's the age of digital transformation. The age of digital transformation is using real-time data to reduce emissions now, rather than intermittent monitoring. And that age of digital transformation will lead to a quantum reduction. It'll lead to that next 90% reduction or more. And it's exciting that y'all are a part of that. It's exciting that y'all are helping reduce emissions around the world, making the air cleaner around the world, and contributing towards the advancement of environmental justice.
Yeah, we are always striving. We are changing the baseline. Now let's start all over, and now we want another 90% of today, not what has been 40 years ago. So now we have the rest of the 10%, but the 9% will be the new 90% because we start now. We want to get 90% of the levels right now. So it's like we always it's like the rabbit and the turtle fable.
Yes, absolutely. It's every day the air gets cleaner, every day we innovate, every day we find more solutions, and those solutions are moving towards the age of the digital transformation, which is real-time solutions, 24/7 solutions, and solutions that find leaks and eliminate leaks in an ever shortening period of time. Okay, that's super exciting, and thank you both very, very much for your time today, and thank you for conducting this podcast with us. We look forward to seeing you again in 6 months to a year to hear about that innovation and the drive, the never-ending drive towards reducing emissions and providing platforms and solutions that deliver on that promise.
Ilan, do you have anything for summary? You want to make a statement? I feel like I took most of the time. And
yeah, I just woke up right now. You put me to sleep in that last thing. No, I'm joking. Yeah. So thank you, Steve, for your time. It was a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to be a part of the 4C. 4C. I'll start again.
Yeah.
But it's not just, I mean, before it was just a show. Now it's not a show. It's more than that. I'm thinking of the word. Like what, Steve, what is the 4C now? It's more than just a conference once a year. It's
a platform for collaboration and driving collaboration. The more industry knows what you have to offer, the more they reach out to you. That drives collaboration. So 4C is really a platform for collaboration between stakeholders, whether that's EPA, EPA needs to hear and know that there are innovators out there, that the drive towards innovation has to become a part of the regulatory platform, something that can be adopted quickly. All the things like broadly applicable standards adopted more quickly, more flexibility in the regulatory framework to accommodate innovations that reduce emissions. The goal is to reduce emissions. The goal of the environmental justice folks is to reduce the concentrations on the surrounding communities. And when regulations are an impediment to achieving that goal, the regulatory bodies need to understand that and feel that they're part of the solution. But in order for them to be part of the solution, they need to understand what the innovation drivers are. They need to understand really the nature of the innovation. And the NGOs can't be pushing back on regulatory change and vilifying the agency for regulatory change. In the past, NGOs have also been a part of the problem in that we can't get regulations changed to accept innovation and new technologies, because every time the EPA goes to change a regulation, they're accused of rolling back regulations. Industry nor EPA wants to roll back in a regulation. They want to make the regulations more efficient, more effective, more accommodating of new technologies. And one of the big problems is all of the parties are in different corners. You have the NGO in one corner of the ring, you have the EPA in another corner of the ring, you have industry in another corner of the ring, and then there's the public. And all four of these stakeholders, they're not meeting in the middle and collaborating. It's more like a wrestling match than a collaborative effort. One of the things that 4C Marketplace hopes to drive is that collaboration. And the way you drive that collaboration is by informing the other parties. Once, it's the information that they all really share the common goal. They all share the common goal of reducing emissions at the lowest possible cost, because the lower the cost, the wider the adoption, not only here in the US, but around the world. As you pointed out at the very beginning of this podcast, what happens in America ultimately ends up happening around the world. And if America is putting out regulations that have antiquated 10-year-old technologies and the rest of the world follows that, well, that's a terrible thing. And so we really don't want to waste that opportunity to be a world leader and to drive not just emissions lower in the US, but drive emissions lower across the whole world. And so what 4C does is 4C is a platform to bring all those stakeholders together. 4C brings them together in a way to collaborate. And the podcast that you've done here today is really a central part of that. It's helping all the stakeholders understand what that innovation looks like and the impediments to the innovation. And you've done a great job today at describing the technology, describing the innovation, describing how the rest of the world follows the US guideline. What you've done today is really, really informative, and it has the ability to bring those parties together. It has the ability to bring the stakeholders away from their corners and into a collaborative environment. So I really appreciate you spending the hour or two today to help not just industrial buyers understand your product, but you're also really helping regulators, NGOs, the public. You're helping all those folks understand what innovation is afoot and how that innovation drives reductions in emissions, and really the roadblocks and the barriers. Some of those roadblocks and barriers to innovation adoption. All the parties need to understand those roadblocks and understand that they're all part of the solution. They're all part of the solution. The NGOs, the environmental groups, they have to help foster regulatory change to accommodate innovation. They have to be a part of that, demanding that regulatory frameworks be flexible enough to adopt these innovations It's not going to be perfect. You know, we talked about quantification and the difficulties of quantification for optical gas imaging. Well, the fugitive emission factors are accepted as if they're a reflection of the actual emissions, and OGI has to try to match those emission factors and correlation coefficients. Well, of course, those emission factors are wildly crude estimates. The emission factor for a valve is for a valve. A 2-inch valve or a 36-inch valve have the same emission factor. A valve that's under 2 psi of pressure or 2000 psi of pressure, same emission factor. A valve that has, you know, ethylene with an extremely high lubricity has the same emission factor as any other you know, light liquid. In Texas, they did develop ethylene specific emission factors, but in most of the other countries, they don't use those. They just use a light liquid factor. But you can imagine a 2-inch valve under 2 psi of pressure having a compound with low lubricity. You could take caprolactam, which is actually self-healing, as one example, versus a 36-inch line with ethylene at 2000 psi as the other example. Those two valves would have a leak rate that differs by 3 or 4 or 5 orders of magnitude, yet the same emission factor is used. So emission factors aren't, they are just a very crude estimate, an order of magnitude estimate. Yet with OGI quantification is held to this standard of, you know, I heard an interview the other day where they were trying to get within 2% or 5% or 10%. Well, look, the emission factors today that we use are off by orders of magnitude. Yes, in orders of magnitude. If OGI quantification gets to within 50 to 100% in real time, my goodness, that would be nothing more than innovation, and it ought to replace every old fugitive emission quantification technique out there, which has a very slim chance on any individual instance of being within 50%, or even 100%, because the factor accommodates every single scenario, even though, so in one case it may be right, in another case it may be 100 times too high, in another valve it may be 100 times too low, but they're looking at orders of magnitude, not percentage, not whether they are 5 or 10 or 15% of the actual number. So that's an example of the confusion that's out there, and one of the things that really has slowed the adoption of OGI from a regulatory framework is this misperception that OGI has to quantify within 10% or 50% the emission. We just don't have something out there right now that's giving us a number within 10 or 50%.